comes to history, we as a people have truly seen it all, from stories that make us question what is really possible and that walk the line between historical fact and fictional folklore, with a grain of truth at their root. Welcome back to The Hive, my fellow bumblebees. It is I, your guest host, Amanda McKnight, aka Vampex13, here to regale you with these top 10 haunting stories from history that will chill your bones. Join me and prepare to get spooked. Maybe grab a blanket, because your bones gonna be chilly. Number 10, the Enfield Monster. You always hear of stories of aliens in the modern day, but the weird thing is, while we are definitely obsessed with them now in the modern day, and supposedly they may have even really existed, there are historical news reports about them and accounts that extend all the way back to the medieval ages and beyond. We've been obsessed for a while now. This story comes to us from a more recent time in American history, in 1973. Supposedly a man made the news for what he claimed he saw in his yard. A weird little creature whose appearance was nothing like he'd ever seen. I don't know about you, but if I saw something like this in my yard, if I had a yard, I would lose it. The man described the being, later dubbed the Enfield Monster due to it being spotted in Enfield, Illinois, as having 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. The weird thing is, when the police came to investigate, they did find evidence of a creature being nearby. They found claw marks on the door screen and footprints that resembled a dog's. Except for the fact that each footprint had 6 toes, so it's either one really freaky dog or something completely unexplained. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Bumblebee and you love when we tell you a little bit of spooky history, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Number 9, Jack the Ripper. One of the stories that still haunts me to this day is that of Jack the Ripper. I think the bizarre thing with this story is that they never caught the killer, despite having so many similar crimes to string together here. The reality is it could have been multiple people behind these killings, but even then, how could the police have not caught a single person to connect to this case? What's more disturbing is the letters that have been linked to the case, whether or not they are real or merely were created perhaps by the press to sensationalize the case more and sell more newspapers. The fact remains that they are eerie and haunting, especially if you don't just read them, but you actually take a look at how chaotically scrawled the words on the From Hell letter appear. It's disturbing to say the least. Number 8, Green Kids of Woolpit. This is an odd folklore tale that still haunts me to this day in terms of its mystery. I still can't believe that there are people that swear that like this maybe happened. We're talking about the unexplained story of what happened to the Green Kids of Woolpit. Now, if you aren't familiar, let me share with you. During the 12th century in England, 2 children were found alone in Woolpit. The children did not speak English, and no one supposedly even recognized the language they used. And while they did appear to be normal for the most part, there was one thing particularly odd about them. They were completely green. They apparently also only ate raw broad beans to begin with, but eventually became more accustomed to a variety of food, and lost their green color. While the boy became sick and perished, the girl lived on and learned how to speak English. When she could speak, she claimed that she and her brother had come from a place where there was no sun, and it was perpetually twilight. She also claimed that everything there had been green. Some believe this is a muddled historical account of something that really happened, but just like through time and us passing on the story, it got all weird, while others believe it is just a fanciful, made-up folktale, but there have been multiple accounts and stories recorded about these children, so that's kind of odd to me. Number 7, Return of Rasputin. Rasputin over time became more myth than man as legends spread about him. But I still think one of the oddest and most bizarre stories involving him has to do with his supposed death. Apparently the people of Russia, chiefly one guy who basically just didn't really like what Rasputin represented and in terms of his influence as well on the crown, decided to take action to stop the man whom they saw as a charlatan and a menace. They invited him over for a night of drinking and to enjoy the company of their wife, supposedly, who actually wasn't even apparently there at the time. time, but after serving multiple doses of poison in his food and drink, the man seemingly was somehow fine. Amazed and confused, they ultimately attacked him physically, apparently needing to shoot him multiple times before he died. And what's even more bizarre is that afterward, there were reports that he had returned, refusing to stay dead, but not wanting to return to his royal duties, and instead wandering off. Some have even wondered if it's possible, due to the insane tale of his demise and just how crazy it is, if he could still be alive somehow today. Maybe he actually did have powers. Today we know it's more likely Rasputin was simply shot point blank, and that's what killed him, and that all of this is just a legend that was created around his death, but the legend both of his life and his death do live on. Number 6, the Magdalene Laundries. This is a pretty terrifying one that I just recently learned of. It's not apparently super well known, but there was recently a BBC miniseries released that was about this historical, long-standing, ongoing event, which is called The Woman in the Wall. So if you are intrigued by it, you can check that out. Today, it's frightening to think how long this practice went on for. The Magdalene Laundries were basically a place where troubled women were sent to basically serve out their days, mainly working in silence in what was effectively unpaid, forced labor. They were held there against their will in many cases because they had been victims of someone forcing themselves upon them, or simply because they had previously behaved outside of societal norms. While unpaid, they would make a fortune collectively in regard to their labor for both the church and the government of Ireland. And it was only as recently as the late 90s before all the Magdalene Laundry locations were finally closed. Number 5, Deadly Castle. For those who don't know of the case of H.H. Holmes, he is an absolute monster, or at least he sounded like one based on some of these accounts. As I was thinking back on some of the most terrifying tales I'd yet to hear in all my days in regards to historical bits and bobs that I've collected, I thought of him and his really horrific deeds. H.H. Holmes was active in his killings from 1891 to 1894. Initially posing as a surgeon in Illinois, he was in reality a con man with a long history of conning people. Some had claimed that his hotel was actually a maze of a place covered in trapdoors and secret passages with various chambers used to kill his unsuspecting victims in different ways and dispose of their bodies. As of 2017, some have claimed this information to have been based on false reports made by the press to sensationalize stuff, and basically as a result of bad police work at the time. However, the tale still persists even today that Holmes may have taken more lives than we even know. Number 4, the mysterious case of the Bordens. Lizzie Borden's case isn't quite as open and closed as you might think. When I returned to do more research on it, I learned that while it didn't seem obvious that Lizzie had been the one to murder her parents, she did behave oddly, and the case itself seems to be very mysterious and honestly very weird. It's possible that this was a family-based conspiracy, or that Lizzie herself was responsible, or perhaps had a hand at least in the murders in some way. Any of these things is possible, although I don't think Lizzie was the one alone to do it. Either way, the bloody incident is eerie in the sense that there are still so many questions that remain unanswered in regards to it, and I feel like still so much we don't understand, like why things happened the way they did. Number 3, Hotel of the Leap. In Colombia, there is a creepy place known as the Hotel del Salto. It is apparently known for being one of the most haunted places on Earth. The hotel was turned into a museum, but that hasn't stopped it from being a really creepy spot. The hotel was apparently made in 1923, and the idea was to give visitors a great view overlooking the Tequendama Falls. However, the guests mysteriously sometimes got a little too close to the edge of the falls, and there were multiple reports of people plunging to their doom. It's believed that this is something people were not choosing to do, per se, but many have been drawn to doing that, perhaps, thanks to spirits who haunt the area, as it's believed that many years ago, people of the indigenous Muisca tribe threw themselves off the cliffs to escape Spanish colonizers. Number 2, the fate of Sir Edward Hungerford. In the 15th century, there is a story about Lady Agnes Hungerford, who lived in Farley Hungerford Castle. She apparently fell in love with the castle's owner and lord, but of course was married already. Seeing no way out of the marriage except, of course, through death, she is believed to have killed her husband so that she could marry Sir Edward Hungerford. But it gets worse. She didn't just kill him, she also burned his remains in the castle's bread oven? Yikes. Number 1, Saint Edmund. Apparently, during the era of the Vikings' raids on England, they came across a holy man named Edmund. now known as Saint Edmund. Edmund surrendered in the hopes of having his people spared from the Vikings' brutality. He, however, attempted to try and then convert the Vikings, which did not go well. In return, they removed his head from his body, ending his life. However, it was then later said that because he was not given a proper burial, he did not actually rest, but stayed alive somehow. When they later searched for his head, it called out to them so that they might retrieve it and be able to give him a martyr's burial. It's also believed that later they actually dug up his remains and he looked like he was healed, which is weird. And his head was reattached to his body, which is also weird. So many weird holy stories like that out there where I'm like, what is going on? It's magic. That's about it. I'll see you in the future.